The stone corridor behind the Alpha's private study had not been used in 40 years. Briseth knew this because she had found it herself, 3 nights after the claiming bite, when Kaelin had whispered that he needed a way to reach her without being seen. The passage ran behind the eastern wall of the keep, hidden behind a tapestry of the first moon hunt, narrow enough that only one person could walk through. He had shown it to her laughing, telling her it would be their secret road until the council stopped insisting he take a highborn mate. She stood in that corridor now with her palm pressed flat against the cold stone, listening. Through the gap in the wall where the mortar had crumbled, she could see a sliver of his study. The dying fire. The oak desk where she had sat on his lap 100 times while he sorted through scrolls. She had come to tell him she was carrying his child. 3 days she had waited in her small room at the far end of the servants' wing for him to send word. 3 days of morning sickness and trembling hands and whispered practice sentences. She had rehearsed the words until they sounded like a song. When no summons came, she had walked the hidden corridor herself. And now she could hear him through the wall. He was not alone. Her breath caught. She pressed closer to the stone and listened to a voice she did not recognize. A woman. Smooth. Amused. The kind of voice that belonged to a noblewoman who had never known want. "And the servant girl?" the voice was saying. "She still believes it, does she?" Briseth's heart stopped. There was a pause. A long one. Then Kaelin laughed. She would know that laugh anywhere. It was the laugh she had fallen in love with during the harvest festival when he had tipped back a cup of honey wine and told her that her freckles looked like a map of the summer sky. It was the sound of the man who had sworn, with his lips pressed to the mark on her hip, that no force in the waking world would ever part them. He laughed, and then he said, in a voice perfectly calm, "She will believe anything I tell her. That was always the point." Briseth's knees nearly gave out. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stop the sound that tried to escape. Her other hand flew to her belly, where the tiny life inside her had been still since dawn. The mark on her right hip, the claiming mark he had given her on the night of the first frost, flared with a heat that was not comfort. It was the searing pain of a promise being unmade. "You are certain she will cause no trouble," the woman said. "She has no family, no house, no one to speak for her. Tomorrow the binding is announced. After that, she can weep in whatever corner of the kingdom she chooses. She is nothing. And the bite? A mark on a servant's skin. The council will pretend they did not see it. By the time anyone asks, I will have given you 3 heirs, and the matter will be as old as winter snow." Tears slid down Briseth's face before she knew she was crying. She bit down hard on the edge of her thumb to keep from making a sound. The child inside her gave one small kick, as if it wanted her to run. Through the gap in the wall, she saw the woman move into view. Pale hair braided with silver thread, a gown the color of fresh blood. A profile she had seen at a distance in the great courtyard only once, when the Highland lords had come to pay their tributes. Lady Saravin of the Sable Peaks, the northern heiress the council had been pressing Kaelin to accept for 3 years. The woman crossed to Kaelin and rested one slender hand on his cheek. Briseth could only see the back of his head, the dark hair curling against the collar she had mended with her own fingers the week before. She saw him lean into the woman's touch. She saw him turn his head and press his mouth to the inside of her wrist in a gesture that had been, until that moment, something he had done only for Briseth. A sound rose in her throat. She swallowed it down. She backed away from the wall, and the corridor behind her seemed to stretch and tilt, and for one long moment she thought she was going to faint. She would not faint. She would not scream. She would not give him the pleasure of hearing the servant girl weep behind the wall. Briseth turned and walked back the way she had come. Her feet knew the path even when her eyes could not see through the tears. She reached the hinged panel behind the tapestry, slipped through, and let the heavy fabric fall back into place. The secret road that had belonged to the two of them was gone. She went to the kitchen garden, where the old rosemary grew wild against the wall, and she knelt in the dirt and pressed her forehead to the cold ground and let herself cry only for as long as it took to count to 100. When she reached 100, she stood. She wiped her face. She walked to her chamber and packed everything she owned into a single linen sack: a spare gown, a wooden comb that had been her mother's, a small iron box of healing herbs, 3 silver coins she had been hiding for a year, the flat river stone Kalen had given her on the night he had told her she was his fated mate, which she held in her palm for a long breath and then set down gently on her narrow bed, because she would not carry his lies another step. She did not look back. She walked out through the kitchen gate, past the sleeping hound, past the stable boy who was too drowsy to raise his head, past the outer wall and into the black fields beyond. The sky was heavy with cloud. The first flakes of a late snow were beginning to fall. She did not see the shape high in the tower above the keep. She did not see the figure at the tower window whose hand was pressed flat against the glass. She did not hear the sound that came from that tower a long moment after she had passed out of sight, because the wind carried it the wrong way. It was not a howl. It was a word. A single word, spoken by a voice that cracked on the middle syllable. A voice that did not sound like the voice she had heard through the wall at all. By the time the dawn broke over the sable peaks, Bryseth was gone. And the man she had left behind had not moved from his tower window, and his hands were pressed against the glass, and he had not laughed at anything for 3 days. The village of Mirisand sat at the bottom of a valley where 2 rivers met, and neither remembered which one had come first. Bryseth had been there the full length of a season when the blackthorn began to bloom. She had arrived in the last week of the hard winter, walking out of a snowstorm with her belly already showing and her lips cracked with cold. The miller's widow, a thick woman named Oksana who kept 3 dogs and spoke to them more kindly than she spoke to most people, had taken one look at her and brought her inside without asking a single question. The widow had given her hot broth and a bed of clean straw and a wool blanket that smelled of cedar, and she had said only, "You will tell me what you want me to know when you want to tell it. The rest I do not need." Bryseth had wept into the broth and told her nothing. In the days that followed, she had called herself Ilva. She had told the village that her husband had died of lung fever, and she had no people left in the south. And the villagers had believed her because people in Mirisand believed what they were told, unless they had a reason not to. She had taken the abandoned reed-thatched cottage at the edge of the common pasture in exchange for healing work, and within a month, she was the person the village sent for when a child could not stop coughing, or a ewe would not drop her lamb, or an old man's wound had started to smell of rot. Her grandmother had been the village healer in the place Bryseth had been born, and Bryseth had learned at her knee which flowers opened the chest and which roots slowed a bleeding wound. She had brought this knowledge with her to the keep when she was 15, and it had been the reason she had caught Kalen's eye, the morning she had bandaged a gash on his hand that he had received sparring with his captain. She did not let herself think about that morning. She thought instead of the child, whose kicks had grown stronger as the snow thinned. She thought about the village, which had decided it liked her. She thought about the kettle over the fire and the bundles of wild mint drying from the beams. She did not think about the mark on her hip. She examined it every night because she could not help it, but she did not think about it. The mark should have faded. Every healer's text she had ever read, every old woman's tale, every thread of lore passed down through the wolf-kin villages of the south, all agreed that a claiming bite severed by rejection would vanish within a single turning of the moon. The skin would smooth. The teeth marks would shrink. The place where the bond had lived would become ordinary flesh again. Bryseth's mark had not faded. If anything, it had darkened. The outline of his teeth, which had been a pale crescent when she fled the keep, was now a deep rust color, like dried blood pressed into her skin. It grew warm when the wind blew from the south. It woke her in the night with a pulse that matched the beat of her own heart. And sometimes, when she lay very still with her hand resting over it, she could swear she felt something pressing back from the other side of her skin, a warmth that was not her own, a searching, a grief. This was not how rejection worked. She did not let herself try to understand it, because to understand it would be to hope, and hope was a knife she could not afford to carry. One evening in the first week of the blackthorn bloom, she dreamed of him. She had dreamed of him every night since she left, but this dream was different. In this dream, he was on his knees in snow, and he was calling a name that was not her name, and his voice was cracked and raw as if he had been calling it a very long time. His hands were bloody, his hair had gone longer and wilder. He looked up at her through the space between the worlds, and his eyes were not the flat gold she had last seen through the study wall. They were the burning gold she remembered from the summer nights in the apple orchard. The name he was calling in the dream was her own name, her true name, not Ilva. She woke with a gasp and her hand pressed to the mark, and her heart beating so hard she thought the child might feel it. The room was cold. The fire had burned down. She lay still and waited for the dream to fade the way dreams always faded. It did not fade. It sat in her chest like a stone that was also a heartbeat, and for the first time she allowed herself to think the forbidden thought. What if the bond had not been severed at all? She pushed the thought away. She got up. She washed her face. She stoked the fire. Oksana's oldest girl, a quiet 7-year-old named Temi, came to fetch her mid-morning because the blacksmith's wife had started her pains early. Bryseth spent the better part of the day easing a breech-turned baby into the world and stitching the mother closed afterward. And when she walked back across the pasture in the late afternoon, her hands smelled of lavender soap and her shoulders ached. The sun was low. The blackthorn was white against the hedgerow. She stopped walking. She did not know why she stopped. Something in her, something older than thought, had gone very still. Her skin had gone cold across the back of her neck. The mark on her hip was burning. She turned her head slowly and looked toward the tree line. The trees at the edge of the pasture were old, older than the village itself, and the shadows between them were deep. For a long moment she saw nothing. Only the green dark between the trunks. Only the wind moving through the new leaves. Then the wind shifted. And from the shadows under the oldest tree, a pair of eyes opened. They were not animal eyes. They were not human eyes. They were gold, a gold she knew, and they were looking directly at her, and they did not look away. The child in her belly kicked once, hard. And Bryseth, standing alone in the pasture with her hair still damp from the long birth and her hands smelling of lavender, understood with a certainty that hollowed her out that she had been found. She did not run. Her grandmother had taught her long ago that when a wolf watches you from the trees, you do not run, because running teaches the wolf that you are prey. You walk. You walk with your back straight and your breathing steady, and you do not look over your shoulder, and you do not let the wolf see your hand shake. So Bryseth walked. She walked down the slope to her cottage. She opened the door. She closed it behind her. She set the bar. And then she sat down on the flagstones with her back against the door, and she put her hands on her belly and she breathed, counting each breath in and each breath out, until the pounding in her chest became something she could live with. When she finally stood and crossed to the window, the tree line was empty. She told herself she had imagined it. A trick of the light. A deer. A shadow. She told herself this while she boiled water and made tea she could not drink. She told herself this while she checked the bar on the door for the third time. She told herself this right up until the point where Oksana's boy, a round-cheeked 10-year-old named Pell, came pounding on her door with a message that there was a stranger at the tavern who wanted to see the healer. Bryseth went very still. "What sort of stranger?" she said. "A traveler. From the North Road." He has a lame horse and he needs a poultice, and mother says I should fetch you because he offered a whole silver piece. A traveler from the north road, from the direction of the keep. She nodded and told the boy she would come. She took her healing bag from its hook. She tucked her hair under her shawl. The tavern was called the Two Rivers, and it smelled always of peat and wet wool. At this hour, it was nearly empty. Oksana stood behind the counter with her arms folded and her sharp eyes measuring. The traveler was at the corner table with his back to the wall. His horse, a gray mare with a swollen fetlock, was tied at the rail outside. The traveler was not what she had expected. He was old. Old in the way of men who had lived through more winters than they had asked for. His hair was white. His beard was white. His hands, when he lifted them to push his hood back, were knotted with the heavy knuckles of a man who had spent his life holding a blade. And his eyes, when they found Briseth, were a pale, clear gray that did not match what she was expecting. She had been expecting gold. She let herself breathe. "The miller's widow tells me you have a poultice for a hot joint," the old man said. His voice was rough but mild. "My mare stepped badly crossing the ford. If you can ease her before morning, I will thank you with a silver piece." "No story needed," Briseth said. "Let me see the leg." She went outside with him and knelt beside the mare and ran her hands down the swollen fetlock. The horse was sound enough. He nodded his thanks and gave her a silver piece before she had done any of the work, which made her look at him a second time. "Where are you traveling?" she asked. "South, away from the high country. There is nothing left for me there." "The high country," she repeated. "The Sable Peaks." He watched her face as he said it, in the way of a man who had been told exactly what to look for and was checking his list. "Things are not good up there, not for a long time now. I do not follow the news of Highland lords." "No reason you should." He stroked his mare's neck. "But they say the Alpha has gone strange. They say he has not slept since the first frost. They say he tore down the eastern wing of his own keep with his hands because a servant girl had once laughed there, and he could not bear to hear the quiet where her laugh used to be." Briseth's breath stopped. "Strange tales," she said. "Stranger ones than that. They say he has sent riders to every village in 4 kingdoms, and every rider carries a drawing of a woman's face, and every rider has orders to bring news of her back and not to touch her, because the Alpha has sworn that any man who lays a finger on her will be torn apart by his own hand." The old man kept his voice gentle. "They say the woman has a small crescent scar at her left temple. They say she hums when she works. They say she has a habit of pressing her hand to her right hip when she is thinking, as if something there troubles her." Briseth's hand was on her right hip. She had not realized. She lowered it slowly. "And they say," the old man continued, "that the Alpha calls her by a name no one at the keep has ever heard. He calls her Little Star. And when he cannot sleep, which is every night, he stands at the tower window and he says the name out loud to the dark, because the wolf in him believes that if he says it enough times, she will hear him wherever she is." The silence in the tavern yard was very large. Briseth could not feel her own fingers. "Who are you?" she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. "My name is Vasil. I was first sworn to the Alpha's father before the Alpha was born. I have served the Sable Peaks for 51 years. He did not move. He did not reach for her. "I am not here to take you back, child. He does not know I have found you. He does not know I was looking. I came alone, and I came because I had to tell you a thing he will never be able to say to you himself, and I had to tell you before someone worse than me found you first." "What thing?" she whispered. Vasil opened his mouth to answer, and from the road behind the tavern, in the direction of the forest, the mare lifted her head and pinned her ears flat and rolled her eyes white, and a sound rose from the trees that was not the sound of any animal Briseth had ever heard in this valley. It was the sound of a large thing running very fast. Vasil's hand went to his belt. They followed me, he said, and all the mildness was gone from his voice. Oh, child, forgive me. They followed me. Vasil moved faster than an old man should have been able to move. He had Briseth by the elbow before she fully understood what was happening, guiding her through the tavern door and into the small back room where the widow kept her good barrels. He closed the door. He slid the bolt. Sit, he said. Who followed you? Sit, child. Please. We have a little time, and I will use what I have to tell you what you must know. She did not sit. She stood with her hand pressed against the nearest barrel and her other hand pressed against her belly. Tell me now, she said. The sound in the trees is a pack of 6, Vasil said. Not wolves of the sable peaks. These are hunters from a house that has been paying very good coin for news of a missing servant girl, and I was followed out of the high country by a man I should have killed 2 nights ago. I thought I had lost him on the southern road. I was wrong. Why are they looking for me? Because the Lady Saravan cannot afford for you to be alive. The name hit Briseth like cold water. She sat down on the low stool beside the barrel without meaning to. Vasil knelt in front of her. Slowly. Listen to me, he said. I have one telling in me, and I need you to believe it the first time. The night you left the keep, you heard the Alpha speak words in his study. You heard him laugh. You heard him speak of you as if you were nothing. She nodded. That was not him. She stared at him. I mean, that the man you heard speaking was wearing the Alpha's skin, but his mind was not his own. And I will tell you what was done to him, and when I am finished, you will know why he has not slept since the first frost. Speak plainly, she whispered. The Lady Saravan's mother was a witch of the Sable Peaks before she married up into the northern gentry. Not a healer like you or your grandmother. A different craft. An older craft. Vasil's pale eyes did not leave hers. The night before you came up that hidden corridor, Lady Saravan sat across a table from the Alpha in his study, and she poured him a cup of wine, and she set a small silver pin into the rim of the cup, a pin that had been in her family for 6 generations, and she spoke a word over it that no one alive outside her bloodline remembers how to say. When the Alpha drank, the pin took something from him, not his life, not his strength. His voice. Briseth's lips parted. She took his voice for 1 full night and 1 full day, Vasil continued. And while his voice belonged to her, she wore it like a cloak. She stood in his study in a shape that looked like him to any eye that looked too quickly. She spoke to her own reflection in the long glass by the fire, playing both parts, and she did it loudly enough and long enough, and with enough of his habits of speech, that anyone who stood behind the wall in the hidden passage would hear the Alpha's voice saying words the Alpha had never said. Briseth made a sound. She did not know what sound. She knew you were listening, child. She knew about the passage. One of her women saw you slip behind the tapestry 6 weeks before, and she had been planning this since that day. She wanted you to hear the worst thing a woman can hear in the voice of the man she loves, because she knew, as all of us who served the old Alpha know, that a true mate bond cannot be broken by any law or any counsel. It can only be broken by the true mate herself, by an act of her own will, by the belief that she has been cast aside. No, Briseth whispered. He woke in his bed an hour after you left. His voice was returned to him, and his mind, and he rose and called for you. And when you were not there, he went to your chamber, and he found the flat river stone on your pillow. He has kept that stone in his pocket every hour since. He has slept no more than an hour at a time. He has sent no riders with orders to harm you. I swear this on my own sworn blood. He has sent riders with orders to find you, and he has sent them quietly because he knew Lady Saravan would send her own hunters the moment she realized you were still alive. Still alive. She believed you would not survive the winter. A woman alone, with a child coming, walking south through a blizzard. She did not plan for Oksana and her dogs and this valley. When word reached her last month that a new healer had appeared in Mirisand with a crescent scar at her left temple, she sent hunters, the ones running toward this tavern now. Vasil drew a short blade from inside his cloak. I came to warn you. I came too slowly. Forgive me. Briseth was not listening to the last part. Her whole being had gone still around one fact. The man she loved had not laughed at her tears. The man she loved had been sleeping in a chair in his study with a silver pin draining the voice out of him, while a witch in a blood-red gown pretended to be him behind a wall. The mark on her hip had been burning all this time because the bond had been crying for her. Her hands began to shake, then her shoulders, then the whole of her, until she was weeping so hard she could not breathe, and Vasil knelt in front of her without touching her, and he only said very softly, I know, child, I know. Something thudded against the back wall of the tavern. Then something crashed through the front door. Oksana's voice rose in a shout of pure outrage. There was the sound of wood splintering, a dog snarling, a man swearing in a hard northern accent, and under it all, the heavy padded footfall of a creature moving on four legs inside the tavern's front room. Vasil stood. He did not look old anymore. Stay here, he said, behind the barrels. Do not come out if you hear me scream. Do not come out if you hear me go silent. Do not come out for any voice you do not know. He opened the door and stepped into the tap room, and he closed the door behind him. And Briseth, crouched behind the tallest barrel with her hand pressed flat against the mark that was no longer a wound of shame, but the living proof that she had been loved all along, heard the first body hit the tavern floor. The fight was not long. Briseth crouched behind the tall barrel with her hands pressed over her mouth, and she listened to a room she could not see. She heard Vasil's voice, low and clipped, giving an order. She heard Oksana's voice, which should have been frightened and was instead furious. She heard the snarl of a wolf, and then a second, and then a third. She heard the wet, hard sound of a body going down. She heard Vasil grunt, the sound of a man taking a blow to the ribs. Then the door to the back room exploded inward. A man stood in the doorway. He was not one of Vasil's wolves. He was tall, in a dark leather coat, and his hair was the color of wet rust, and his eyes were the cold, pale green of someone born far north of where northern-born people were supposed to be born. There was blood on his chin. He held a short, curved blade, and his other hand was empty, and he was smiling. The miller's widow is tougher than she looks, he said, in an accent Briseth had heard only once before. And the old man is slower than he was. Briseth did not move, could not. The thing in the doorway saw her. His smile widened. Come out, little star, he said, and she felt the name land like a slap because it was the name only Kaelin had ever used for her, and this man had no right to it. I have a long ride back to the peaks, and I would prefer not to drag you. He took one step into the room. Briseth did not come out. Something was happening in her chest. It was not fear. This was different. A stillness that started under her sternum and spread outward, down her arms and up the back of her neck. And it was warm. The warmth of sitting too close to a fire. The warmth of putting her hand on a kettle that was just about to whistle. The warmth of something that had been sleeping inside her for a very long time and had just opened one eye. She had felt this before. She had felt it when she was 8 years old, the day her grandmother had laid a hand on her forehead in the dim cottage of her childhood, and said, in the particular voice she used when she was naming something that needed to be named, "You are like me, child. You are more than like me, but you are going to promise me, right now, that you will never show it to anyone. You will live longer if you never show it." Briseth had promised. She had kept that promise for 20 years. The man in the doorway took a second step toward her. Briseth stood up. She came out from behind the barrel and she faced the man with his curved blade, and she felt the warmth in her chest rise up into her throat and down into her hands and into her feet and into her belly where the child was listening. And she opened her mouth, not to speak, but because the thing inside her needed a way out. What came out of her mouth was not a sound. It was a silence. Every sound in the room fell away. The crackle of the tavern fire, the breathing of the man with the blade, the wind in the thatch, her own heartbeat. Everything went silent, and the silence was not an absence. It was a presence. It was the silence her grandmother had made in the dim cottage the day she had straightened a child's broken arm without touching it. The man in the doorway opened his mouth. No sound came out. His eyes went wide. He lifted his free hand to his throat. He tried again, and again nothing came. And then he tried to step forward, and his foot did not know where the floor was. He staggered. His blade slipped out of his fingers and hit the flagstones. He sank to one knee. He was not unconscious. He was simply stopped. Briseth lowered her hands. The silence lifted. Sound came flooding back into the room. She stared at her own hands. Her grandmother had never taught her this. Her grandmother had taught her the small things, the useful things. Her grandmother had never taught her how to take a grown man's voice and will from his body and set him down on the floor as if he were a lamp that had been carried into a quiet room. Through the open door she could see into the tap room. Oksana was on the floor, holding her ribs, alive. 3 dark wolves lay dead between the tables. A 4th was trying to rise and failing. Vasil was on one knee with his side soaked in red and his blade still in his hand, staring at Briseth, his pale eyes wider than she had ever seen a man's eyes. "Child," he whispered. The child in her belly gave one small kick. And then, from somewhere beyond the tavern, from farther off than she could have imagined anything could be heard, a howl rose into the evening. It was not a hunter's howl. It was the sound of a wolf who had just found the thing it had been searching the long cold season to find. It was the sound of a wolf who was still an hour away. It was the sound of a wolf who was not going to stop coming. Briseth crossed the room to Vasil. She knelt beside him. She pressed her hands to his side, and she felt the warmth move through her into him. His bleeding slowed. His breath eased. "He is coming," Vasil whispered. "I heard. Child." Vasil caught her wrist with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "When he arrives, whatever shape he is in, whatever his eyes look like, you will know him. Trust what you know. Do not trust what you see." "Why would I not trust what I see?" "Because he has been too long without sleep and too long without you, and the thing that comes through that door will not look like the man who sat with you in an apple orchard. You will need to look past the shape." She nodded. Outside, the first sound of hooves on the north road reached the tavern. Not one horse, many. It was 37 minutes. Briseth counted because there was nothing else to do with her hands. She had finished with Vasil's ribs. She had checked Oksana, who was bruised and furious and refusing to lie down. She had dragged the rust-haired man and the one surviving wolf into the cellar and barred the door. At 37 minutes, the hoofbeats reached the edge of the village. At 38, they stopped at the tavern door. At 39, something dismounted. The sound it made when it hit the ground was heavier than a man in boots. 4-legged. At 40, the tavern door swung open. The wolf that walked into the 2 rivers was the size of a large wolf. But he did not move the way a wolf moves. He moved the way a man moves who has been forced into a wolf's shape and cannot remember how to change back. Each paw set down with the hesitation of a creature thinking about the paw before it used it. His coat was black and matted. His ribs showed under the fur. His eyes were gold, a dull, tired gold that had been burning at the edges for so long there was nothing left in the middle of them. Vasil let out a soft sound of grief. The wolf crossed the tap room and stopped 4 paces from Briseth's stool. He did not come closer. He sat down. He lowered his great head until his muzzle nearly touched the floor, and he waited. Briseth did not move. She looked at the creature in front of her. She looked past him, through him, into him. She looked for the man who had pressed his lips to the flat river stone before he gave it to her. She looked for the man who had called her little star. She found him. He was there, somewhere under all of that wreckage, waiting for her to see him. She saw him. "Kaelin," she said. The wolf's whole body shuddered. The shift, when it came, was not graceful. It was the change of a wolf who had been in wolf shape too long and had forgotten how to leave it. Bones cracked, muscles tore and re-knit. He made a sound that was almost a sob. When it was done, Kaelin was kneeling on the flagstones of the two rivers in nothing but his own skin, and he was looking up at her, and his eyes were finally the eyes she remembered. He did not say her name. He looked at her, as if saying her name might break her. Vasil rose with a groan, shrugged off his cloak, and laid it over Kaelin's shoulders without a word. Then he went into the kitchen and closed the door, and Oksana went with him. Briseth did not stand up from her stool. "You were there," she said. "In the study. It was your skin, but it was not your voice. It was not me. I heard you laugh. You did not. Kaelin." Her voice cracked. "I heard you. I stood behind the wall for half an hour and I heard you." "I know what you heard." His own voice was raw, the voice of a man who had been shouting into wind for a very long time. "I have heard every word of it again every night since, because my wolf will not let me forget it. And I will tell you now, little star, that I would cut out my own tongue before I would ever say those words to you, or about you, or in your hearing." Tears were sliding down her face. "The silver pin." He laughed. It was a broken sound. "Yes. I woke up in a chair I do not remember sitting down in, and my mouth tasted of iron, and there was a woman asleep on the couch across the room who had no business being in my study at that hour. I went to your room. I found the stone. I have carried it every day since." He reached into the cloak Vasil had given him. He drew out a flat gray river stone, smooth as a held breath, and he set it on the flagstones between them. She looked at the stone. All of her grief broke open in her chest. "I thought you had laughed at me," she whispered. "I know. I thought I had been a fool for every kind word I had ever believed. I know. I thought our child was going to grow up with a mother who had to lie about his father." Kaelin went absolutely still. "Our child," he said. She had not meant to say it like that. She had meant to say it tenderly, by firelight. Instead, she said it to a kneeling man in a borrowed cloak in a country tavern, and when she heard her own voice saying the words, she began to cry in earnest. Kaelin moved. He did not rush her. He crossed the space between them on his knees, slowly, and he stopped at her feet, and he did not touch her. He put his forehead against her knee. He wrapped one arm around her calf. That was all. He simply put his head against her knee and he breathed. She put her hand in his hair. It was the first time she had touched him since she left. He made a sound. She made a sound. "I love you," she said into the top of his head, because she had never said it aloud to him, not once. "I love you, Kaelin. I tried to stop, and I could not stop. Little star, say it. I love you. I have loved you since the morning you bandaged my hand and scolded me for sparring without my guards on. I loved you through the drugged sleep and the broken voice and every hour of believing you were dead in a ditch somewhere because of me. I love you now. I will love you through whatever is left of me, and there is not much, but every piece of what is left is yours." She slid off the stool and onto the floor with him. They held each other. They held each other the way survivors of a shipwreck hold each other on a beach. He put his hand on her belly. The child moved against his palm. He made a sound that was not quite human, and he pressed his mouth to the curve of her stomach through the linen of her dress, and she felt his tears on her skin through the cloth. Eventually, Vasil came to the kitchen door and cleared his throat. Kalen lifted his head. "What?" he said. "A rider came in behind you, my alpha, from the south. She was carrying word you must have before the hour was out." "What word?" "The Lady Saravan has taken the keep, 3 days ago. She has sat herself in your high seat and declared you dead by madness. She has the council in chains. She has the household in chains. She has sent word that any wolf who still answers to your name will hang before the next moon." Bryseth felt Kalen go rigid against her. "There is more, my alpha. Speak it." "She has your sister." Kalen did not move. He did not speak. The sound that rose in his throat was low and terrible, and not the sound of a man. Not yet, but close. He turned his face into Briseth's shoulder and he held her. And he said into the curve of her neck, in a voice gone quiet and cold and sure, "Then we ride tonight." They left the 2 rivers before moonrise. Oksana stood at the door of the tavern with her arms folded across her bruised ribs and her 3 dogs pressed against her legs. She had refused to leave. She had refused a purse of silver. "This is my village," she had said. "The roads have been bad before. Bring the healer back when the roads are her again." And she had pressed into Briseth's palm a small wrapped packet of the good tea, the one she saved for grief, and had kissed her forehead once, hard, and had closed the tavern door. Briseth cried for the first mile. She cried for Oksana, and for the little girl Temi, and for the quiet kindness she was leaving behind. She cried leaning against Kalen's chest on the back of a gray horse, with his cloak wrapped around both of them. She cried until the crying itself began to feel like rest, and then she slept. And while she slept, Kalen only held her. She woke near dawn to the smell of wood smoke. They had stopped in a glen beside a half-frozen stream. Vasil was bent over a small fire. Kalen had dismounted and was standing with his back to her, looking at the water. She slid down from the horse and went to him. "I need to tell you something," he said, "before we reach the peaks." "Tell me." "My sister's name is Narina." He said the name as if the name itself were a wound. "She is 11. She has not been well since our mother died last summer. She has a bad lung, and she gets tired easily, and she is the only person in the world besides you who has ever called me an idiot and meant it kindly. Saravan has had her for 3 days, and Saravan does not understand how a bad lung works. I am telling you now because I do not want you to find out tomorrow in the keep that there is an 11-year-old girl in a cell somewhere, and have that be the first time you heard about her." Bryseth put her hand on his back, flat between his shoulder blades. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For telling me before, instead of letting me find out." He turned then. His eyes were still hollowed, still haunted. But they were his eyes. "Little star," he said. "Yes. When we reach the peaks, I am not going to be able to be gentle. I will need to be what my father used to be when the old wars came. I need you to know that when you see it, it is not the man you are looking at. The man you are looking at is still here. I am only putting him away for a little while. I know because I put one of mine away last night, in the tavern. There is a thing I have never told you, a thing my grandmother made me promise not to tell anyone. I did not kill him, but I did something to him that I did not know I could do, and I am going to have to learn to live with knowing I can do it." Kalen's hand came up to her cheek. "Tell me when we have time," he said. "I will listen for as many hours as you need. I will hold you to that." He leaned down. He kissed her. It was a small kiss, a single press of his mouth to hers. But when their mouths met, the mark on her hip flared, and she felt through the bond the full weight of what he had been carrying for her. She saw him kneeling at her empty chamber for the better part of a night. She saw him walking the corridors of the keep at the hour before dawn, calling her name until the servants hid from him. She saw him on his horse in a town she did not know, holding up a small piece of paper with a drawing of her face to a baker who had never seen her. She saw him standing at a tower window at 3 in the morning saying the words, "Little star," to an empty sky. She broke the kiss. She pressed her forehead against his. "I heard you," she whispered. "Every night. I thought I was dreaming. You were saying my name to the dark, and I heard you." His arms tightened around her. "Then you know I never stopped." "I know." They rode the rest of the day. In the late afternoon, they crested the ridge that marked the southern edge of the Sable Peaks, and Bryceth saw the keep for the first time since she left. The gray stone, the 3 round towers. But something was wrong. The banners were the wrong color. They were not the Black Wolf of Kaelin's house. They were the blood red of Saravan's. And above the main gate, where the house stone of the Sable Peaks had hung for 9 generations, there was now a second banner. A white one. Bryceth could not make out what was on it from this distance, and she asked Kaelin, and she knew the moment she asked that she should not have asked, because Kaelin's whole body turned to iron against hers. "Do not look," he said. "What?" "Little star. Do not look." But she had already understood. A white banner hung above a gate in the old wars of the Sable Peaks only for one purpose. It marked a hanging scheduled for the following dawn. The white cloth was raised the evening before, to give the condemned a night to prepare. Kaelin's sister, Nerina, 11 years old, a bad lung. Kuravan had decided, 3 days into a coup that was not going as quickly as she had planned, to remove the last piece of leverage anyone else had over her. Bryceth turned on the horse and put both her hands on Kaelin's face. "You listen to me," she said. "You are not going to lose yourself tonight. We are going to take the keep. We are going to take your sister back alive. And you are going to stay with me while we do it. Because if you go, I go. And I am not going anywhere, Kaelin. Not tonight. Not ever again." His breath came shuddering out of him. "Say you hear me." "I hear you." And at the bottom of the ridge, the first scout of his remaining loyal riders emerged from a copse of trees with his hand raised, because he had news, and the news was not going to be good. The scout's news was that the white banner was not only for Nerina. Saravan had announced a second hanging. At dawn, side by side with the Alpha's sister, she intended to hang the old woman who had been Kaelin's mother's lady-in-waiting for 30 years, a woman named Talus, who had been one of the first people at the keep to suspect that something was being done to her Alpha and had spent the long months feeding information to Vasil. 2 hangings, 2 bodies on a single gallows at first light. Kaelin sat very still on his horse and heard this news out. When the scout was finished, Kaelin asked 3 questions, in a voice flat and clear and quiet. How many of his sworn riders were still inside the keep? Where was his sister being held? Where was Talus being held? The scout answered, 73 riders inside, most in the barracks, a handful in the old kennels, a few in the servants' wing. Nerina in the north tower. Talus in the cold cells below the kitchen. Kaelin nodded once. "We do this tonight," he said. "My Alpha, there are still 3 hours to sundown. If we wait for full dark, we double our chance. We do this tonight. I will not have my sister sleep one more night in that tower thinking no one is coming." Vasil, riding up beside them, cleared his throat. "My Alpha, Bryceth should not enter the keep. Let us leave her with a guard in the lower village." "No," Bryceth said. Kaelin looked at her. "I am going in. You need me. If your sister's lungs are bad and she has been 3 days in a stone cell, she is going to need a healer inside of 10 minutes of when you break that door." Kaelin's jaw worked. "She is right," Vasil said quietly. "I know she is right." They planned the attack in the lean-to of a shepherd's hut. Vasil had carried a rough map of the keep inside his coat, folded so many times the creases were translucent. He laid it on the dirt floor and weighted the corners with stones. The plan was simple in the way desperate plans are simple. Vasil would lead 12 riders to the kitchen sally port, locked with a bolt that could be lifted from inside by a specific stone in the outer wall. He would take the cold cells and free Talus. 2 riders would guide her out. Kaelin would take 20 riders to the North Tower, going in as a wolf through a gap in the outer wall broken in a rockslide 12 years ago and never properly repaired, a gap that Saravin's northern guards did not know about. Briseth would go with Kaelin. She would wait in the shadow of the outer wall until the signal came. Her job was Narina, nothing else. She was not to engage with a single soldier, not to slow for any wounded man, not to turn back for any voice that called her name. "And the Lady Saravin?" one of the riders asked. Kaelin did not look up from the map. "I will deal with her when my sister is safe." They moved at the last blue hour before sundown. The approach through the rock slide was slow. Kaelin carried Briseth the last 20 feet up the broken slope in his human shape. He set her down behind a collapsed cornerstone at the base of the outer wall, pressed his mouth to her forehead, and looked at her for one long breath. "If anything goes wrong, if you hear me call for you to run, you run. You do not come looking for me. Promise me." She did not promise. She kissed him instead. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he dropped into his wolf shape between one step and the next, and the 20 wolves behind him dropped too, and they were gone up the wall and over it in a black, silent flood. Briseth waited. The 2 riders with her, a young man named Brance and a gray-haired woman named Othe, crouched on either side of her. The child in her belly moved in slow circles. The mark on her hip was hot and steady. She heard the first shout from inside the keep. She heard a wolf snarl and a man scream, and something heavy fall. She heard a small sharp sound like a signal bell. 3 rings. Pause. 3 rings. And Audhi's head came up, and Audhi said, "That is us." They moved. The postern gate was open. A rider she did not know was holding it. They went through, up the stone stairs behind the North Tower, past 2 crumpled shapes on the stones that Briseth did not let herself look at. Up and up and up, until they reached the landing outside the cell where Kaelin stood in his human shape, with the door already open and his hands red to the wrists. Inside the cell was a narrow cot. On the cot was a girl. She was very small. Her hair was dark like Kaelin's. Her lips were blue at the edges. Her eyes were closed. Kaelin had his hands on her shoulders. "Narina. Narina, little wolf. Narina, I am here." Briseth went to the cot. She put her hand on Narina's chest. She closed her eyes. She found the lung, the bad one, the one that had been struggling for 3 days in the cold. She found the place where the breath was catching. She sent warmth into it, slow and patient, the way her grandmother had taught her. Narina's breath hitched, steadied, deepened. The blue began to leave her lips. Her eyes opened. She looked up at her brother and she said, in a small, dry voice, "You took long enough." Kaelin made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. Then a third voice spoke from the doorway. "How touching." Briseth turned. Lady Saravin stood in the doorway of the cell. She was dressed not in the blood-red gown of the study but in fighting leathers, and in her right hand she held a crossbow that was already cocked, and the bolt on that crossbow was not an ordinary bolt. The head of it was pale silver and carved, and Briseth, who had been the granddaughter of a healer long enough to know what silver worked into old runes looked like, understood in one breath what she was looking at. It was not meant for Kaelin. The bolt was thicker than a hunting bolt, wider. It had been made for something specific. It was meant for the child in Briseth's belly. Saravin smiled. "Hello, little star," she said. "I have been so looking forward to meeting you properly." and her finger tightened on the crossbow's trigger. Briseth moved. There was no time to think. She stepped between the crossbow and the cot where Nerina lay, and she put her hands up in front of her belly, and she opened her mouth, and the silence came out of her for the second time in 2 days. The silence was bigger this time. It rolled off her in a wave that filled the cell, and everything inside the wave stopped. The bolt hung in the air. Saravin's finger, already pressed through the trigger, did not complete the motion. Her eyes went wider still and then stopped moving altogether. For one long breath, the cell was a held painting. Briseth held it. She had not known she could hold a whole room before. Holding a room took more of her. She could feel the warmth in her chest turning into heat, and the heat turning into something dangerous. And she understood in a new way what her grandmother had meant. It was not only that others would fear her, the gift would take from her if she used too much of it at once. "Kaelin," she said, and even saying his name took effort. "The bolt." Kaelin crossed the cell in one step. He pulled the crossbow out of Saravin's frozen hand. He caught the bolt out of the air. He turned and pressed both into Briseth's trembling hands. She closed her fingers around the silver bolt. She let the silence go. Saravin staggered as the world came back to her, and the scream that came out of her was not a word, only a sound, the sound a hawk makes when a net falls over it. She lunged for Kaelin with both hands curved like claws, and Kaelin caught her wrists without effort and spun her, and pinned her face first against the stone wall. "Nerina," Kaelin said quite calmly, "close your eyes." Nerina closed her eyes. Kaelin did not kill Saravin. Killing her would be a mercy. Kaelin was not in a mood for mercies. He pulled her wrists behind her back and bound them. He bound her ankles. He gagged her with a strip of her own fighting leathers. Then he lifted her, not gently, and set her down in the corner of the cell on the flagstones. "You will be taken to the council hall," he said. "You will sit in the witness chair. You will hear every charge read. You will hear my mother's lady-in-waiting testify. You will hear Vasil testify. You will hear the household you imprisoned testify. You will hear the servant girl you tried to kill testify. And you will sit in that chair and you will listen until there is no lie left in you. Then you will be judged. And you will live long enough to understand every part of what you built and every part of how it came down." Saravin's pale eyes above the gag were not afraid. They were furious, but not afraid. That bothered Briseth more than the fear would have. Kaelin seemed to feel it too. He turned his back on his prisoner and came to Briseth and Nerina, and he lifted his sister carefully off the cot and into his arms. Briseth tucked the crossbow under her arm with the silver bolt held gingerly between 2 fingers. "We go down," Kaelin said. They descended the tower in silence. At the bottom, they came out into the courtyard. The courtyard was full of wolves. Kaelin's. Every wolf of the Sable Peaks who had been imprisoned or hidden or held at knife point for the last 3 days was loose and standing, turning as one body toward the tower door as their alpha stepped out with his sister in his arms and his mate behind him, and the witch who had taken their keep bound between 2 riders. Vasil was at the front of them. His side was bandaged fresh. Talus was beside him, shaking but upright, her thin white hands folded at her waist. The courtyard was silent. Kaelin set Nerina down on her feet, keeping one arm around her shoulders. He looked across the gathered wolves. He opened his mouth to speak, and Saravin, silent until that moment with her mouth gagged and her hands bound, did something no one expected. She smiled. Around the gag. With her eyes. A smile that said the game was not over. And from above, from the parapet of the high wall that ran across the western side of the courtyard, a voice called down in a hard northern accent Briseth had heard before. "Drop the prisoner," the voice called, "or the child dies." Briseth looked up. On the parapet stood a tall man in a dark leather coat with hair the color of wet rust, and in his arms was a child. Not Nerina. A different child. A small boy. perhaps 7, dark-haired, thin, terrified, limp in the hunter's arms. The stable boy. The stable boy who had been too drowsy to raise his head the night Briseth had walked out of the keep. The hunter had his curved blade at the boy's throat. And the hunter, Briseth realized with a cold, sliding horror, was the same man she had stilled in the tavern. Saraven had not sent one hunter. She had sent 2, and she had kept one here, hidden, against exactly this moment. She had always planned to lose the tower. She had only been buying time. "Drop her," the hunter called again, "or this child does not see another breath." Kaelin went absolutely still. Briseth felt the bond flare. She knew what he was about to do. She felt through the mark the calculation happening in him, the way he was measuring the distance to the parapet against the speed of a blade on a small throat. She knew the silver bolt in her hand was not going to be enough, and the gift in her chest was almost spent. But she had one more thing. She lifted the crossbow. She had never held one in her life. Her hands shook. She set the silver bolt into the groove. She raised the weapon. She found the hunter on the parapet. She found, in her chest, a stillness that was not the old gift, but something new. Something that had been born in the tavern and grown on the ridge and opened all the way on the tower stairs. She exhaled. The hunter, seeing the weapon raised, laughed. He was too far. The shot was impossible. The child in Briseth's belly kicked once. She fired. The bolt struck home, and the hunter went backwards off the parapet without a sound, and the boy fell forward onto the stones, and 2 of Kaelin's wolves were already moving, catching the child before he could hit the ground. The courtyard held the silence of a place where something had just ended that could not have ended any other way. Briseth lowered the crossbow. Kaelin crossed to her in 3 steps and took the weapon from her and set it on the flagstones. He wrapped both arms around her. "Little star," he said. "I did not miss. I saw." The child did that. The child moved my hands at the end. Kaelin went very still against her. He drew back. He looked at her belly, and then at her face, and she watched him understand what she had just told him. "Our child," he said. "Our child is something, Kaelin. I do not know what, but it is something, and it has been waking up in me for days, and I think it is going to be a great deal to carry and a great deal to love." He put his hand on her belly. The child pressed back against his palm as if greeting him. And Kaelin, Alpha of the Sable Peaks, keeper of a bond that a silver pin and a blood-red gown had not been able to unmake, laid his forehead against hers in the bloodied courtyard and began, very quietly, to laugh. The laugh was not the laugh from the study. It was the laugh from the apple orchard. It was the laugh she had been missing for a very long time. The council hall of the Sable Peaks heard Saraven's trial 3 days later. It took 7 hours. Talus testified. Vasil testified. 6 members of the council who had been kept in chains testified. The rust-haired hunter's body was identified as a sworn man of a Highland house that had been paying Saraven's family for 12 years. The silver pin was produced. It was broken over the council stone by Kaelin's own hand. Saraven sat in the witness chair and said nothing for most of the 7 hours, and when she did speak at the end, she said only that she had done nothing her grandmothers had not done before her in the old wars, and the council was free to do what it liked. The council did what it liked. It stripped her of name, of holding, of title, of the right to shift. It exiled her to a small stone house on the northern coast where a trusted keeper would live with her for the rest of her life, and where she would be allowed paper and ink and books, but no visitors. Briseth watched the sentencing from a high seat beside Kaelin. She was not yet his wife in the eyes of the council. That would come. But the council had accepted her already, because they had watched Kaelin walk into the hall with her hand in his, and they had watched his shoulders for the first time in a long season be the shoulders of the man they had sworn to. That night, in the chamber that had been Kaylin's mother's, Kaylin knelt at Briseth's feet on a woolen rug and asked her to complete the bond. She had been expecting it. She had not been expecting him to ask. She had assumed he would simply take her hand and draw her to the bed and let the bond finish itself. Instead, he knelt, and he took both her hands in his, and he said, very quietly, "I gave you a mark without telling you what it was going to do. I did it in an apple orchard and I thought it was a promise and I was a fool. I will not do that again. If you want the bond finished tonight, I will finish it. If you want to wait until the child is born, we will wait. If you want me to carry this half bond the rest of my life, because you do not trust my teeth in your skin a second time, I will carry it. Tell me what you want." She looked down at him. "Kaylin," she said, "get off the floor and come to bed." He came to bed. The bond completed itself in the dark, under a blanket her grandmother would have recognized as a good wool. When her teeth closed on the place where his neck met his shoulder, she felt the bond finish, and she felt everything he had felt for her come pouring into her, and she felt everything she had felt pour into him, and for a very long time after, neither of them could speak. She saw through the finished bond, the night he had woken in the study with the taste of iron in his mouth. She saw the morning he had stood in her empty chamber with the river stone in his hand. She saw the first week of his search, when he had still believed he would find her within days. She saw the second month, when he had stopped sleeping altogether. She saw the third month, when Vasil had come to him at dawn and said, "My Alpha, you must eat." And Kaylin had said, "I will eat when I have found her." And Vasil had set down a bowl of broth and said, "Then eat one bowl so you can find her." And Kaylin had eaten only because Vasil had asked. She saw herself through his eyes. Not a servant girl. Someone whose laugh in the kitchen garden had made him understand that the rest of his life was not going to be what his father had planned for him. He saw her too. He saw the blackthorn bloom. He saw Oksana's dogs. He saw the little girl Temi with her quiet hand in Briseth's. He saw the pasture at sunset and the eyes in the trees. He saw the tavern cellar and the rust-haired man on the flagstones. He understood how brave she had been to stand up out of that long grief and walk toward him anyway. They slept. After. For the first time in a long season, Kaylin slept the full night. The rebuilding of the keep took the spring and half the summer. Narina's lung, with Briseth's tease, and her brother's hand in her hair every night for a month, healed better than it had been since their mother's death. Tallis resumed her post with such fierce dignity that no one dared mention the cold cells. Vasil was given the old guest cottage by the apple orchard as his reward, and he kept bees there because he had always wanted to keep bees. The council annulled the binding announcement that had never been spoken. The banners of the Sable Peaks were put back up above the gate. The white banner was burned in a brazier and the ashes scattered into the river. At the end of the summer, on a warm night when the stars were thick and the crickets were loud, Briseth went into labor. The birth was long. Oksana, who had come up from Mirisand for this expressly, held one of her hands. Tallis held the other. Kaylin paced. Near dawn, Briseth gave birth to a daughter. The daughter had Kaylin's dark hair and Briseth's hands, and when she cried for the first time, the mark on Briseth's hip pulsed once, and then went quiet for the first time in a year, because the bond had settled, fully and finally, into the place it had been trying to reach. Kaylin knelt by the bed. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his mate. When he finally spoke, he said, "What do we call her?" "I have been thinking about that," Briseth said. "I want to call her by a word my grandmother used to use when she was pleased with something small. A plain word. I want her to have a name that reminds her she came from a woman who lived in a reed-thatched cottage in a valley where two rivers met, and who was loved by a man who would have torn the sky down to find her. Tell me the word." "Sable." He laughed. It was the apple orchard laugh. "Sable of the Sable Peaks," he said. "Yes, Little star. Yes. He leaned over the bed and pressed his mouth to Briseth's forehead, and then to their daughter's forehead, and then to the mark on Briseth's hip that had been a wound of shame for a season, and a lantern through spring and summer, and was now, at last, a quiet silver scar. Outside, beyond the tower window where he had stood through the long nights saying her name to the dark, the first light of dawn was reaching over the peaks. It was not the howl of many wolves that marked the morning. It was the sound of one old man in a cottage beside an apple orchard, lighting a fire in his hearth to heat water for tea, and humming to himself the tune of a song the Sable Peaks had not heard in 51 years. The tune his own mother had hummed to him as a boy, the tune a man hums when the world has at last made itself right again. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the story.